Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Data Protection for Microsoft Teams, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This event is presented in partnership with our friends over at Druva. Thank you so much for joining us on the webinar. This is going to be a lot of fun, and I'm confident you will learn a lot about Microsoft Teams data protection by the end of the event. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm glad to be serving as the moderator. As always, we want these events to be educational. We're all former IT professionals ourselves here at Actual Tech Media. We know how tough it can be out there in the world of IT, and we want to help you to solve your technology challenges on these events. Millions, hundreds of millions of people are using Microsoft Teams around the world today, and protecting your Microsoft Teams data is more important than ever before. We encourage you to use the questions pane there in your audience console. I see many of you have already said hello or good afternoon, and we appreciate that. But we also want your technical questions for our Q&A session at the end of the event. So while you're watching today's presentation and live demo, we encourage your questions and we'll be queuing them up for our Q&A session. We even have a best question prize to help encourage those questions, if you will, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But first, I want to call your attention there to the Handouts tab as well. It's there that you'll find a link to get started with the Druva solution, which you'll be learning about on today's webinar. And there's a link right there at the top of the page for a 30-day free trial. So we encourage you to check that out. And then at the end of the webinar today, I'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card door prize. If you're watching this on demand, of course, that drawing would have already occurred. The prize terms can be found there in the Handouts tab as well. And then, as I mentioned, we also have our best question prize for an additional $50 Amazon gift card. That's how much we value your questions. And we just hope that that encourages you that, if you have something on your mind, you're not quite sure if you should ask it, go ahead and ask it and you'll be entered into that best question prize drawing. Of course, you still must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. All right, so with that, I'm excited now to introduce you to today's expert presenter. Welcome to Vanessa Toves, Solutions Architect for Microsoft 365 at Druva. Vanessa, it's great to have you on. Take it away.
Hi, David. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you all, for joining. So I appreciate the opportunity to share some knowledge today. So today we're going to talk, as David said, about 365 and specifically Microsoft Teams. Always, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Joyful, good title. My background is really focused on Microsoft technologies since the very first version of SharePoint on-prem, the SharePoint portal server, back when there was no Google, and I think a Yahoo user group is how we all commiserated together during that time, and Microsoft's BI suite, their SQL Server database, reporting services, and so on. So, and I've kind of taken that all the way up into the cloud. So there really is not much I haven't touched, I haven't focused on in my career. Teams, very specifically, has had a major boost, of course, in the last year and a half, as I think maybe many of you, I think there's 70, 80 of you online right now. You might have gotten thrusted into using Teams maybe sooner than you wanted to, or maybe you're considering adopting it. But overall, companies like the large and enterprise-sized customers, they had other solutions, but I think there was other infrastructure issues that really drove the adoption of these large companies. Like, most companies never really had a VPN that could support all their employees on at one time. And so, for whatever the reason, you and your organizations either had to, dive into Teams. What happened with you, as along with many others, is that there is this messaging over the last few years, very specifically, that I always found really troubling, and that was you don't need to back up your 365 data. And when we talk about Teams, we also have to talk about the challenges that are more umbrella to the entire platform as well. Use your recycle bin, the platform stable, use retention. These are features that might be specific to certain applications, and they have a certain architecture in a certain place. But one of the things about them is that they're not, they don't allow you the ability to be resilient in a data loss situation. And it's also not why our customers are always or are coming to us. They're not just saying we need a backup. But they are doing things right. Their DR plan has to have a strategy. They want to ensure, especially with the rise of ransomware in the last year and a half as well, right? As people went to cloud solutions, ransomware has increased. So organizations are looking for a tool to help them as part of their strategy, right? To ensure that their 365 data specifically is protected. Now, the when we think about Microsoft Teams specifically, unlike other applications, it is more complex. It's complex because it has its own service and its own data, but it also has a lot of other intersecting services, right? That when presented to you, you think are part of Teams. So when we're architecting our solution for Teams, it's not just about the files tab, which by chance is SharePoint, right? Or the tabs up there that are going to your Excel or your Power BI dashboards or any of that, right? It's so many um, different types of data that we have to ensure that we incorporate into this solution for you. So when you're looking at Teams, you're not just looking at one service, right? You're looking at a number of services. Now, the other thing about that is the type of information, right? I mentioned the tab, and it's where things are stored. Teams, of course, itself has certain things, the settings in the teams, the name of channels, right? The permissions, the members, and how they present it to you. But truly, your data for 365 and even right specifically Teams, all that lives in Azure, right? Whether it's a SQL table, right, an Azure blob, whatever the storage mechanism that Microsoft is using to house your data, it lives in Azure, which means it lives also underneath the umbrella of the shared responsibility model. Right? That kind of goes back and talks about that challenge, right? That misleading message. The shared responsibility model under Azure is very simple: that you're responsible for your data. Just like you're responsible for your data right behind the firewall, your SQL databases, your servers, any of your VMs, right? Any of that you're backing up today, the same applies to 365 and, of course, Teams and the other apps that are in there. Now, what does, let me make sure I'm sorry, 1 second. I think I went too far. Okay. So the challenges kind of continue, right? In terms of there's the complexity where your data is located, and then the accidental data loss, right? We start to talk about the actual loss themselves. Now, where individuals are concerned, we have admins, we have our own users, and you might also have third-party users, whether those third-party people are, actual, they're authorized to actually come into your environment. But because you know 365 is very wide and it's very deep in its administration, and depending on how much support that your team has, the ratio of employee to IT support, the smaller the company, the potentially 45 to 70 to 1, right? 45 to 70 employees um, to one IT support. Now, what that means is as a company grows, they might have less, right? I've actually worked with companies that have had 1,500 to 5,000 employees to one admin, right? One IT support that really focuses on 365. And because today these admins are not just 365 admins or Exchange admins specifically, or Teams admins, they are also Okta admins and Jira admins. These are individuals that are also having to learn about and understand the complexities of security across all of these cloud applications that companies are adopting. Right. So when we think about what happens potentially within the admin, and when I read this particular article, it didn't surprise me by any means. And I'm not trying to take a dig at any admin. I was an admin. I work with admins. But the reality is, I call it what's on the other side of that button effect. that you don't have so much depth of knowledge. And the situation here was simple. Like the ticket was, go clear out the chat for this one individual. And this person, whether they knew it or not, or they Googled it, they created a policy. And we'll take a look at these things, right? We're going to actually take a look at that of some of these situations in our demo. But they applied it to the wrong group. And by doing that, right, they wiped out the chat, the individual chat for 145,000 users. How do you recover from that? In that case, when this happened, there was no, right, there's no recovery. And even at the time that this occurred, which was even 2 years ago, Microsoft didn't have the API services. Like part of these challenges about even backing up data is what is available to recover, right? So within the APIs, right, within Microsoft 365 APIs. So, very specifically, there's so many policies, there's so many places within the administration where the admins that are in there have the ability to affect content that they don't own or they didn't curate. And to some extent, they may not have the necessary time or knowledge to understand what's happening, right? What did I do? What am I doing with this? The other thing about the administration, and I have yet to see this, I've yet to see this with any size organization I've worked with, which is digital policies created, whether they're in 365 or any other cloud-based application. Digital policies are rarely reviewed. I had a situation where I was on with a customer. We were in a proof of concept, and during this time, they'd opened up a ticket where the chat started falling off for one of their teams, and they had no idea why. So, right over the period of like a week that we're working with, we're working on this proof of concept. I checked back in to see how the ticket was going. I kind of had an idea where I would look. So that's what happened, right? They kind of stalled in their help desk or their ticket process, their support ticket, and I walked them through. I'm like, let's go take a look. Let's go see what happened. We went into their compliance, looked at their retention, their policies that were in there, and lo and behold, the year before, when they started migrating, right, when they started using 365, an admin that was no longer there created a policy called test. He was testing because I can, I will, right? Oh, this is pretty cool. Let me create a policy. And during that test process, he had picked a number of teams that were created then, right? There was no content in these teams because they were brand new. And the policy was very simple. After a year, right, start deleting the chat. We only retain for 1 year. That was just a test policy, but there's no this administration, like I said, coupled with the users, the admins, and a lack of policy by organizations at time to go back and re-audit these digital policies that affect data, right? This is where loss can occur from a accidental perspective, right? From an administrative side. Now, we'll continue with that, right? The users themselves, accidental data loss, we all kind of know that as it is. You only have to look in your own ticketing systems to see the types of tickets. But because Teams is a intersecting apps, most people don't think about the fact that truly SharePoint has a major part to play in the storing of files, storing of data for every single team. So these are just four different things that you cannot recover from. You cannot use retention. You cannot use, right, the recycle bin to go get this data out. And because the user experience is getting to be so much easier, and right, as this younger group of people that are more competent with technology and more comfortable, they'll go and create a legal contracts library, and they'll use metadata because they're going to start using a process to approve it. But they go and they delete a column on accident, or they mass update something because it's very easy to do that. And you can't recover from those types of things. Right? So the loss, this has nothing to do with ransomware by any means. You have data loss within this platform that can happen probably more frequently, right, then you're going to get hit with ransomware. But by all means, one is a much different impact to an organization. So accidental data loss from the administrator down to the end user, those are things that you have to consider as to reasons why we have to protect this. And of course, right, our external attacks via email or OneDrive, because in the world of teams, behind a team is a group. Right? That's a group of members, a group of owners, registered guests, but also the mailbox for that team itself, right? The calendar for that team, all of the information that might, especially when we're dealing with our calendar, have some kind of reference back into this team, right? Who can see this team, what the mail is, what mail that's in there, and of course, any OneDrive links. So when we think about these challenges that you're facing, please do not think in one silo of just teams, because the data loss that you are going to have to deal with comes from more than just one area. Right? So what does in all of this, what does Microsoft have to say about protecting your data? Now, prior to September, right, even though this article up here in the date says 11/8, that was actually when it was last modified, but it was originally published in September, and it was the very first time that Microsoft, very specifically for 365, and in this case, they talked about it being Exchange, right, says the first step in recovery is to verify your backups. It's not some like thing that just says, hey, go verify your backups, or maybe you don't have to use backups, just go verify them. The reality is they know that they cannot recover to the extent that customers need their data back. And especially, even though this talks about Exchange Online, make no mistake, it also applies to your OneDrive, to your SharePoint, to your Teams. It's just going to take them enough time to finally come out and make the statement that you need a backup to protect your 365 data. For any of you, and we talked about the importance of Exchange, right, in its role with a team. Well, even becomes even more complex, of course, where Exchange is concerned when you deal with the online archive, right, where all your data lives and all the complexities of that. Hopefully, I'm not confusing you too much. But the point being, the first step that Microsoft really says in your ransomware strategy is to check your backups. The second step is to disable your Active Sync or OneDrive Sync. And how this kind of applies, once again, right, back into your Teams world, is that the OneDrive Sync is an application. You may not know quite, it doesn't necessarily spell it out, but you've got this icon in the Files tab that allows you to sync your libraries and your files down. So if I'm an HR specialist and I have access to the HR employee files, I click that OneDrive Sync. I now have a folder representation of, right, this live connection into that document library, right, for that team. So the things that affect a team, right, it's not just necessarily, just a file, right, or an email, but in this case, another application that has its own Windows update on your computer that has nothing, right? The OneDrive Sync doesn't fall underneath the umbrella of the compliance of 365, right? It just is going to move a file into your OneDrive or into your SharePoint or to your Teams repository, and whether it's infected or not, whether it has malware, right, or not. So when we think about this, for step number 2, to disable this OneDrive sync, the underlying reason is that it will transport a file, infected or not, or has the potential to transport a file, infected or not, right? It might have a link embedded in the Word document that it's bringing up into your SharePoint or your OneDrive, right? So, right, the challenges, these are like all these compelling challenges that you're going to face if you haven't already faced them today. Now, how does Druva help do this? Now, I can talk about Druva because I came to work for Druva over a year ago. And as a solution architect, right, in my career, one of the things I did was to do a software selection oftentimes for companies, whether it was for a knowledge base or knowledge management tool for some financial institution, or a backup, right, for a company that provided all the wireless hardware for the Hilton hotels, right? All of those companies, they go through a process. I had a set of criteria I looked for. And we might end up talking about Druva by all means, but consider these things to be what you should also look for in a platform to protect your your 365 data, to protect your Microsoft Teams. Now we'll start with a simple user interface, right? We want it to be simple, clean, easy to navigate. The platform that Druva has, right? It's cloud based. You don't have any servers. You don't have to buy storage, right? Physical storage, and not only that, it's scalable. So in the time that I've been here, we've already gone down the path of architecting additional apps, bringing in additional apps, whether it's the Google Suite or Salesforce, right, back up under our cloud applications, or even the hybrid workloads that you might have for your VMs and SQL servers and Oracle databases, all the way up into AWS. That's what you look for in a platform, is that it is one, there's this scalability, both in what it can do, however many customers or however many sites you might have, but also what is the potential? What else is this company going to be protecting that we can bring underneath one umbrella, right? That's Druva. The other is how's the data stored, right? We have object-based storage for your metadata and for your files. Now, because they're separated and because it's object-based, right? This is where, right, this word that I never used before, right? It was immutable, where ransomware cannot execute, malware cannot execute, sorry, in where your files are stored, where your backup objects are being stored. And so the architecture, once again, right, this is stuff that I was looking for. How is this safe? How is this secured for a customer? And then you go on into the security aspect, right? There's zero trust. Whether you want to use the integrated SSO or even integrated Okta to manage how you access this, or just use the multi-factor authentication, right? The other aspect of security is isolating where. Where can my admin actually perform these functions? So being able to have a policy like Druva has to say, you can only perform and access this from behind, these specific IPs, this IP range, so that this admin can't just go to their home computer, log in with their credentials, and absolutely, right, download files or emails. So there's a combination of things when we talk about how to protect your data. Now we only have a few more slides, and then we're going to jump into this demo. Now, how do we connect? How does someone and a vendor connect into 365? It kind of is like three different buckets that you have to think about. This is a very busy slide, but I like it because I get to talk about it in its entirety. One is the authentication to your Azure, which means you have an account that is an active account, and when that account connects to Azure AD, it's passing back an access token. This is an access token that should get refreshed, as we do, right? You refresh it all the time. And that's the first part of the security, that we absolutely have some connection into your Azure. We are not dependent upon your Azure being up for you to access your data, your backups. And then we take that as, this access token when we're getting ready to go get the data. We utilize the Microsoft APIs. Now, we're using the published APIs that Microsoft has and the approved APIs, and we're not doing any backdoor jobs. And the reason why is because your tenant has to be maintained in a supportable manner, right, for Microsoft, which means we're only using what is truly approved. Now we take that data, we call it, and we bring it up into our AWS cloud, and we split it out into two different locations. One, all the metadata, and two, the physical storage, which is then replicated in three different regions. So we also follow, that 3-2-1 process in terms of backup. Now, I think I believe you'll be able to download this, but this I think is whether you have conditional policies, right, conditional access policies, or you have MFA turned on in your own environment, right, we are part of, we use and are kind of are dependent upon, absolutely, right, staying and maintaining a standard with Microsoft when we're getting your data, getting and updating your data. Now, there are two things in once we have access to your data, right? Microsoft once again says to create that initial configuration, to create that app, to do any reconfigurations or applying of permissions, you definitely need global admin access. However, the actual backup and restore does not. And what that means during this process is the very first time you provision the app in your Azure tenant, it says, hey, you do need a global admin, but as soon as that's done, you can actually remove that global admin because the app itself, we have workload based permissions, which is like 365 or Google or Salesforce. You have app-based permissions, which means you can say today, I only want to backup Exchange and OneDrive. I don't want to back up anything else. Or I want to back up OneDrive and SharePoint, right? There's some flexibility in what you can do, but what you're doing by this during this whole app deployment process is you're saying, even though you have an account that might be a super user, that app itself, the Druva app, can only access these very specific things. And we've trimmed our permissions down to be as light as possible in terms of what we need, right, to actually back up and restore. Now, think again, once again, of like how your company works, how your team works, and the flexibility that you might need in terms of being able to back up your data. Right? We mentioned it. I mentioned it with app-based permissions. We also have role-based permissions. So whether you have a cloud admin or you have a help desk admin role that you assign to 1 or 3 or 5 of your employees, you can restrict who can download, you can restrict who can view, you can restrict who can actually see and modify any compliance or look at any of the sensitive data governance that you may you may have or you may be using. But the other part of this and this flexibility, and right, what you should be looking at in a platform is this profile, what we call profiles. Now, profiles somewhat similar to a 365 group in that it has your users in a profile, and then you apply different policies and different things to that particular profile. And we'll take a look at that in a minute. But what that means to you is this: when you are maybe if you do have a segregation of duties, that you have different individuals that have different rights within your normal 365, and you want to have that same similar model right in your backup data. So you can have a 365 role-based administration that's applied to 2 different people, but these individuals only have certain apps that they can see. And then to top it off, this individual can actually is the only one, this one, she can see, this guy can see, right? This executive leadership profile. That means they're the only people that can access the emails and the files, right? The OneDrive files for your senior leadership team, for your executive leadership team, for whoever. So the profiles that we talk about, you think about it as you can use it organizationally, right? Department, team. You can use it geographically. Everyone in the US, everyone in the UK, everyone, right? Depending also upon where you need to store certain, if you have to store certain users within those certain countries, you can have really good organizational skills or organization of where your data is stored, where your user data is stored to stay in compliance, right? If you have to comply with like GDPR and you want to, right, you create a profile and all of your users actually will go into a particular profile based upon the fact that their country in their 365 profile said Germany, whatever that may be, right? All right, so we have just I think one more slide, and I just actually talked about this. I jumped ahead, and then we'll go into a demo. So data residency requirements by user, right, or with SharePoint and Teams. So you can have, we mentioned that multiple storage locations, right? We have 16 storage locations throughout the world on AWS. And this is where you can have 1 or 3 or 5, depending on what your requirements are, what your needs are. And when you do that, you can say, oh, John Smith, he's in the US. Whatever the AD property is, you can actually do automatic mapping. So if you're really good about clean AD and you've got your AD set that where John Smith is in California and he's going to go into you create a rule that says anyone in California is going to go into the US West 1 storage. Anyone that's in New York is going to go into the US East storage. And the same thing when you go outside of that. If they're in like I said, the UK, Australia, you can map these properties. And once they're mapped, they automatically flow into those particular storage regions. And if you add a new user, right, that cyclical nature of being connected into your Azure AD, the Druva app being connected to your Azure AD, if you add a user, we'll already know, and we'll add that user, bring it over, and begin backing it up based upon how you want to, right, whatever rules that you've kind of assigned. And the same for a user that gets terminated, right? If they're no longer there, you can automatically stop backing that user up. And then, of course, what you do with that user after the fact, whether you can preserve that user that is terminated, right? That's another great feature about that. That user may not exist any longer in your 365, but their backup data and their history over the last 3 years, all their email, their OneDrive files still can be maintained in your Druva, right, in your backup. Now let's go kind of continue. I know that we're talking about teams, and I've talked about different things that didn't seem like it had anything to do with teams, but sometimes you have to talk about things more of in an umbrella so you can also then be more specific. So let me share my screen real quick, and I think it's this guy. So let's go talk about this. When we are jumping into teams, making sure that this is actually sharing. Now let's talk about like the complexities about teams itself too, right? And what we do, right? Where can loss actually occur? So for every single team that's out there, you have a default set of settings. Generally, companies don't change the settings. And in these settings, this is where an owner of a team can basically define what their members can do. So by default, everything is on, which means, right, these members can delete or restore channels, right? They can delete their chat. Let's see what else. Edit their messages, delete their messages, right? So this is where, if we're setting it as an admin and forgetting it, and we don't have some sense of training for these owners, or right, owners of these teams have no idea that this information can absolutely be deleted, no one's going to go in here and check this, right? To say, I don't want people to delete anything in our HR secured employee file site. I don't want anyone to delete anything in our 2022 financial budgeting site. I don't want to lose any of that data. I don't want to lose the chat, any of that. So this is the part too, that once it's set, people rarely come in here. Owners rarely come in here and make these changes. So as it goes, things get deleted, and we have no way of bringing that data back. Right? There's some limitations into here where chat is concerned on Teams. Once it goes and it falls outside of this window, the only place for you to look for and see chat history on a team is in the e-discovery window. And even then, you can't get that back into your team. It's there if you have a retention policy, but there's no way of bringing that back into this executive leadership team. All right, we'll continue on that. I've got my little bookmarks here. Now comes the part, right, where we're talking about like at the administration. And this is where we're starting that, and we have the ability to affect content that we don't own or any of that. So you have a global policy setting, right? This is a global setting for teams. This is what everyone has the ability to do. And in this one, owners can delete sent messages, which means they can't, right? Whatever the default is that you have in here. But this is where, if you don't make changes to this, right, you have the ability still to delete any of your sent messages. So what I've done in the past, right, is I create policies that, depending upon how your team, or what your compliance is, what your regulatory is that you fall under, you can actually create and modify this policy. I generally like to create policies and not modify, right, the out of the box ones. So the policy I have, I mean, you don't have to call it this by any means, but is to shut off their ability to delete their messages. They can edit their messages, but they can't delete their messages. It can't go away, right? So in here, once I have these policies, whatever settings I have in here, then I begin to assign them. Right? I can assign them to a group of people. I can assign them to a particular leadership team, and saying, hey, this team, right, I want to assign this policy. Now, if you haven't done this, or you have no idea if it's actually being done, regardless of what I talk, about what we're talking about, protecting your 365, you want to still do these types of things. You have no idea what can happen to your data. So even though we are talking about where people may or may not do something, uh, creating these policies and auditing them is still a fantastic idea, right? It just by chance happens to be situations where people may not quite know what's happening, or and they'll go and create something and apply it to, right, the wrong group, like that one example that I showed you. All right, so messaging policies that are just in Teams, this is where you can affect data, where data loss can actually be driven from. All right, we have, I think it's the same link here. Let's go to our governance. Now, in the compliance world of 365, it's an umbrella. And in that umbrella, you create a policy that can be applied across applications, right? And this is whether it's for all SharePoint sites, for something with a particular pattern, with something after so many years, right? So when we're looking at our retention policies, which I think I'm in the wrong. I must be in the wrong tenant. However, the policy in here, right in our compliance area, this is where I can actually create these policies and actually have them apply to different individuals, to different teams, and it's tenant wide, right? These are some of the things that we kind of talk about, or I talked about, alluded to. Let me go back here. All right, so now let's take a look at how Druva protects 365, right? So we're talking about, and very specifically, we'll focus on Microsoft Teams in here. There we go. All right, so we have our Microsoft 365, and then let's go take a look at our Teams. And if we have some more time, I'll kind of come back in and talk about any of the other areas. So every day you might have a new team that's created, right? And with that, you can create, you have the ability to create this global policy, right? This auto configuration that says, I'm going to check every single day if there's a new team. And if there is, I want to automatically assign it to a particular storage. And I want it to be backed up once a day or twice a day or once a week, whatever my retention is, right? And that's the default that happens to every new site. So a new site comes in tonight, it's going to automatically be backed up. If you want to ultimately not do that, and you want to make sure that you're in control, if you've got multiple storage locations, you can actually uncheck that particular thing, and then assign the storage yourself, right? But that leaves it to you to have to make sure to come in every single day. So I would always recommend having the auto assign, and if you need to move the storage, you can after the fact. So I've got a global policy that talks about backup and retention, right? I can discover my teams. of course, any new teams that have been created. Or I'm going to go into a very specific team, and in this one, I can say, I want this guy to be backed up. So I've got individual teams, ability to change this policy. I want to back that up twice a day. And I do know that we actually are releasing a new update within this quarter with our data retention for teams. So it'll allow you to actually define how long you want to keep that. All right, so for teams, right, I can customize that at a team level. I can look at the history of everything, all the backups, whether they were succeeded or they failed, if there was any issues with that. I can also download any of the logs and take a look at those logs very specifically and say, oh, right, this is what I found, this is what it processed. So I can look at all of this individual data. I can see exactly how many channels I have, where the data is for the SharePoint, and the details about that. Now I can come in here and go restore my data. I can also kick off a backup on the fly, absolutely. But if I'm looking at my restore options, I go back in and I can look at points in time. This is the difference between some of the features. Like a good example is the OneDrive backup feature. Teams does not have a backup feature. OneDrive does have a backup feature, but it's really not an enterprise backup feature. It is a backup feature that is dependent upon version history of a file and the recycle bin, files remaining in the recycle bin. Well, that doesn't always apply, right? Things go away from the recycle bin. You need a point in time recovery, whether I'm backing up my executive leadership team twice a day, but what I'm looking for is to recover, Someone did a OneDrive sync to the document, the library that's in here, and they were on their computer got infected, with some malware, whatever the situation that caused a corruption of files to be transmitted using OneDrive sync into my team's data here. I need to be able, as an admin, to go back to a very specific point in time, January 5th, and restore my files. Right? I don't need to mess around with, I think that file, I don't know where that file is, not in my recycle bin. No one needs the time, we don't have the time for that. So then what can I restore in the team? Well, I can restore the settings for sure. So what this means is this. If you recall, well, let's see. Let's go back to this team. While that's loading. These are the settings that wrap around a team. What can be done? And this is what the admins have access to be able to modify. Anyone that isn't, an owner, anyone that's an owner, if I go into my manage team and I look at the settings of this entire thing, not just the settings tab, but the permissions, what can members do, who was in this team. That's a big thing that you cannot do today, Even on a SharePoint, in a Microsoft team, you can't easily say from a compliance perspective who was on this team 1 month ago today. There's no way of doing that, but that's what you have, Every single time we back this up, we're not just backing up the stuff, the chat, we're backing up the owners, the members, the guests that you had in there, and what the settings were, all right? So now comes the different channels, 2021 offsite, the general channel. In every single channel, you have conversations, files, wikis, and tabs. So if I look at the conversations that were in this one, and I might have conversations in this other channel, just depends. Let's look here. All right, I might have, I'll have to go take a look to see which one I have conversations in. But your conversations, that's your channel chat. That means this chat, if someone was in this monthly meetings, there's no posts in that one. I'm going to go find one where I have posts. I'm sure I have one with posts. I'm just going to, oh, here. For sure, I have some in here. Okay, let's go look at our HR employee files and kind of map that. Here's the channel of active employees. here's a chat, and this is who said it at the timestamp that they had. So we're going to go take a look at our HR employee files team instead of this one. All right, let's go back here. HR employee files, perfect. I'm going to restore this data. And we've got our active employees, and we have our conversations. Right, there's my chat. Of course, there would be more with any one of these. Are files that are there. When you restore files, you are restoring data from and back into a SharePoint. Right, so there's a SharePoint backup that had occurred. These are all the subfolders in this. So if I actually were to go navigate to my SharePoint backup, I actually would see the same, right, these same people in that underneath this active employee files, this files tab. You have the wiki. There's some limitations. If you are actually using a wiki, or if you're not, then right, the OneNote is a much better option, just in general. That's just my my opinion. But there are some. Remember, we talked about the API, right, and what the API can do. Over a year ago, the API for Teams or individual chat could read, but they couldn't update. They couldn't allow vendors to update the team or the individual chat back into that particular user. So the maturity level of something also is dependent upon what you can do. There's some unique things about the wiki on the Microsoft within SharePoint, within the Microsoft API. The tabs that we're talking about, this tabs here, is this. So when you're looking at the tabs within something, it's these things. And what we back up for these tabs, very specifically in Teams, I know for sure I've got a better one in here. It's just a matter of making sure I have the right here. I'm just going to go to one and show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to create a tab, let's just say to any tabs or the tabs that we protect are Microsoft centric, Microsoft app based tabs. So if you have a tab that has right, it was for third party, today we're not backing that up. And that's because that tab was generated with some authorization process from that user to a particular service. Right? So what we're looking at more specifically is the tabs, whether it was like to an Excel file, to a Visio, to a Power BI, the things that you've customized that lead you and your users back to into some content, right, to some other area. So this is a SharePoint tab. We would restore tabs like this, right, across any one of these channels. All right, so we talked about tabs, channels, conversations, or we need to do a full restore. So I have a team. This is called the HR employee files team. And I'm going to restore this and everything in it, the channels, the files, and I'm going to restore it to a new team. Right. So when we talk about what we have the ability to do, right, I can either restore it back to itself, restore it to a new team. Oh yes. So for when you're doing a full restore, if you have private channels, right, you have to restore those in a different method because, of course, a private channel also has its own separate SharePoint site collection. But your options for restoring back a full team would be to a team that either is existing or to a new team you create on the fly, right? Right? It could be a public, it could be a private channel, whatever that might be. But you can actually restore a team intact. So, right, let's go back in here to restore this. Let's just say I'm just going to restore this one, right, back to the same team, to a different team. So it could already be there. This is HR. Let's look at, let me think. Senior leadership. Well, let's say I wanted to restore this to an existing team, right? It might take a minute to actually go find that one, or I can create one on the fly, right? And when it does that, it'll put back the same members, the owners that you have in there, the same structure, the files, and restore the conversations, right, that are there. All right, so we are kind of, let me see if there's any, I'm just going to make sure if I'm in my teams. Yeah. So if you do want to, I mean, ultimately, yes, you can. Maybe not all your teams need to be backed up. So you do have that ability to disable that, right? If you're just wanting to back up the stuff with your most sensitive data, right? Think about that. You can do that. Uh, right? That is also an option. But I think overall, in terms of the protection for your Microsoft Teams, right? What we're looking at is you have a very complex platform, complex app that has a lot of intersecting data. That data lives and breathes in different areas and has different features and functionality, none of which is to be able to press a button. You don't have the ability today to say, I need to recover all my HR employee files. I have made an HR employee files. This is a secured team. They put onboarding and offboarding and templates and write processes from that, and they have a very secured model. I've made that team and that SharePoint site collection and that structure for so many companies I couldn't tell you, right? So when we need the ability to recover this data for whatever reason that we've experienced loss, you have to have a tool, it's part of your strategic model of how you're protecting your organization's data. One like Druva that allows you to be able to recover from these situations of data loss, right, from the admin to the user to ransomware. It doesn't really matter. The point is you have to be able to recover and be resilient in to get the people back into their data. All right, so I think I've talked quite a bit. I'm going to take a look. Let's go take a look at our questions that we might have in here and see what we've got going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So many great
All
questions
right.
coming in. Really excellent demo, Vanessa. It's amazing the complexities and things that you need to think about when it comes to protecting Microsoft Teams. So I've just brought up a slide here that has some links on it. Those are clickable links. You can click on live product demo right there, or deploy in 15 minutes in the AWS Marketplace, or check out the TCO tool if you just mouse over those links for anyone out there in the audience. Vanessa, were there any questions that caught your eye?
Yeah, actually. I'll start going through them. So, question regarding storage regions, is it possible or easy to modify a user storage region? The answer is yes, absolutely. Whether you do this in an automated way, right? By that, I mean you use an AD property to say that user goes to Australia, that user goes to US West 1. Once it's done, if there's a mistake or if the user moves, you can actually go into the user, modify it, and change the storage location. Right, so that is absolutely a feature that you can rely on. How are saved and previously dated restores protected against access or corruption? I think without getting into all the details of here, I think I really did mention that, or we talked about the kind of this architecture. Sorry, my son is in here doing homework all of a sudden. He's making noise. But that is how it's protected, where it's stored, where's your data stored. So we split the data, your metadata about things, into one area, and your files are stored in a completely different area in object-based storage, right? Which means you cannot execute data. And the only way for you to access this data is by going through the Druva console to get it. And if you've secured that on your own, whether you're doing SSO or MFA, how you choose to connect into your Druva, your admins, right? That's a kind of a policy. Hopefully, I answered that question. Does the Druva solution provide a self-service portal? The answer is yes. Actually, it does. So the self-service portal is a completely different place. Every user can go into and restore their email or their OneDrive files. Now, if you remember the profiles that I talked about, right, you can have a profile for IT admins or IT department. And that profile has a property that says, everyone in this profile, I want you to be enabled to go do self-service restore for your Exchange or your own OneDrive. So that is also configurable based upon how you want to lay out your profiles. All right, I'm taking a look at any other questions that we have here. I think, let me see if there's any. All right, I'm just reading.
Yeah, that's okay. Lots of great questions coming in. We appreciate that
Yeah,
from the
actually,
audience.
yeah, a lot of great questions.
Yeah. One of them I was going to ask you, I'm sure you've heard this before, is when Druva protects the data from Microsoft Teams, does Druva have access to that information once it's backed up?
No, absolutely not. I mean, especially like someone like myself, right? I work for Druva. I work whether I'm supporting, I could be on with a customer, but once your tenant is set up for you, only the members of, that are admins can invite someone to be an administrator. So I can't go log into your tenant. Um, Even in fact, a lot of our reporting on the back end, I can't get to your data. I might report on something that occurred. How long did something take? But it has nothing to do with being able to actually log in, navigate to your teams, and download it. Like the user interface that we had, that's what your user interface would look like. And if I did not have an account, I would not be able to get in and access your data. So hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, excellent. And then, so if folks want to get started
So
with Druva,
there's one question here.
yeah,
What
go
was
ahead.
that?
Oh,
Oh,
go
no,
ahead.
no.
With the
I
question.
was just saying there's one other question, right? In terms of ROA, can Druva's solution work well for a smaller business, right, that may be more decentralized with many remote teams? Yes, absolutely. Whether you're small or large in enterprise, right? We get to talk to everybody. But a good example of that is my sister has a hard cider company. She started off with 5 people. This was years ago. Then I took them into 365. And when Teams, of course, launched, they launched, right? They were able to use it. Great. I love Microsoft 365. I love the platform, where it is, where it's going. They've made such great investments, right? Except in this data protection area, unfortunately. Um, but this small company not only didn't have a domain server anywhere or a SQL server, right? They were all in the cloud, and they were using Teams, and they relied upon their teams. She had several years later, she had a lawsuit that she had to go and get information about, and we've been backing up her teams, and she was able to go get that data. Some of it had, some of it was through like e-discovery, and some of it was through, right, the backup. But the reality is, doesn't matter if you're large or small, when you experience loss, right, it has the same impact. It could shut you down for a week, it could shut you down for a day. So size truly doesn't matter where data protection is concerned.
Absolutely. Great point. All right. I'm afraid we're running out of time here in our webinar presentation time slot. But if folks want to get started with Druva, what's the easiest way to go about it?
I'd say start at our, on our website. You can actually, if you're a self-service person, right, you just want to do it yourself, you can actually sign up for the free trial. But what you can also do, if you want to go through and get a more in-depth demo, right? What you saw me do is very high level, very fast. You can go to the website as well, and then request a demo, and we can have a customized demo for you, right? We'll talk about what you're doing with your team, with your 365. Talk about how you're using, right? If you use shared mailboxes or Exchange Online, what are you going to be doing tomorrow? What are you doing today that we need to protect? So start at our website, and that's where, yeah, that's what I recommend.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for your excellent presentation and the really cool demo. Look forward to having you on again. Thanks, Vanessa.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Have a great day, everyone.
And thank you to everyone out there in the audience for joining the webinar today. Don't forget about the link there in the handouts tab to get started with Druva. And that'll take you to druva.com where you can sign up for the trial, as we talked about. Before we go, I do want to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. This is going out to Michael O'Shea from Maryland. Congratulations. We'll reach out to you to deliver that gift card, and also we'll reach out to our best question prize winner as well. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.